Well, I've opened up the Lelit and we're going to have a little look inside it. It looks a very interesting machine. It's a bit of a pain to get into because there's 8 screws at the top and there's a further 5 screws at the bottom. The top ones use Torx and the bottom ones are using normal crosshead through screws, posi drive type screws. Now I'm just going to find the little screwdriver I was using. You can see the case. Once you've undone 5 screws at the bottom and the 8 at the top, in the top panel, 1, 2, 3, 4, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 at the side, then the case slides off. I'll put that on the floor. Now really, to expose the rest of the machine, if you're working on it, you need to take these ones off. Now I don't know why they're in so tight. They should never really be in tight. They're what I call a PK. They're a self-tapping thread that just goes into a hole. That's pre-drilled, slightly smaller. The electronics. So we get this plate off, which isn't the top of the machine. Obviously it's this diamond cut plate here that would sit on top to make it look nice. The holes there are meant for ventilation, but of course no holes in this, so you don't really get any ventilation there. And in fact, if they were going to make changes and update the machine, I'd say, well, look, with that warmer plate there, why don't they, in the areas you can't see, here and here, drill ventilation holes in this top panel? And at least give it some way to breathe through the top. And I'd go so far as to say there should be ventilation holes in the top there anyway. That's something they could do well to do. And unless I've missed one, which I have, because I did a video, couldn't see it, we get this last one out and we can see what the inside of the machine is like. Okay, and out she comes. Now, this is the first time I've opened this, so you're learning as much as me. Looks good inside, if I'm honest. Try and zoom in a little bit on the boilers there. After the case back is off, finally you get to the inside of the machine. It does take about 5 minutes, and looking at it, I mean, first impressions are, wow, that's nice, you know. Things I do like about it. But, I mean, they're using self-tapping screws, by the way, and some of them are in quite tight, and there is really no need to screw these in so tight because they're stiff in all the way anyway. They won't vibrate out, and the operator shouldn't be ham-fisted putting these in, not really. Now, looking at the boiler, it's nice. It looks like brass boiler, or brass ends. I'm not sure if it's copper underneath. Yep, copper boiler. Nice insulation. You've got 2 limit stats there, and these limit stats are safety devices at about 140-ish degrees. They'll pop off, pop open, and they're resettable. You press the grey button. So if there is a problem, they should cut the power and prevent the pressure going too high in the boiler. The reason there's 2 is just safety, just backup. If one doesn't work properly, the chances of both of them failing are remote. You've got here in the centre your level probe. And that's just a metal rod that sticks down in the boiler and controls the level. As the water level drops below the probe, it activates the pump and refills the boiler to slightly above the probe and then stops. Here's your vacuum breaker. This, when the machine is switched on, this splutters and hisses and this little valve closes. Yeah, it's got a little rubber seal below. And then when you turn the machine off at night, that pressure drops in the boiler and that opens again. Now the reason the vacuum breaker is there is it prevents negative pressure in the boiler, so you don't get anything sucked back up the milk wand, which would be a problem otherwise if you left the wand in a glass of milk. The main reason it was actually put there as well was to stop what they call false pressure. This is the air heating up and creating a higher pressure than truly exists of steam, and that causes the boiler to switch off before it's fully hot. Well, of course, this boiler doesn't have a pressure stat. It's actually got a thermal temperature probe. You just see it there. And that temperature probe will be a thermistor, and that'll control temperature rather than a pressure stat, using a membrane pressure and a micro switch to control the temperature of the boiler using pressure, which means that one of the functions in this is to get rid of false pressure is largely redundant. So now they're using plastic tubing, which I don't mind. I think it's quite easy to use. The only thing I don't like about these fittings, you lift them, push the tube, you know, they're sprung, you lift it, push the tube in and down and it grabs it. The only thing I don't like is when they put one piece of plastic tube like that without a loop in it. And I always like to see a loop in it. Same here, I'd like to see a loop in the tubing. The tubing should be soft enough for that. And why I like to see a loop, it prevents the tension you can see pulling that tube across. Something I'd advise the factory to actually using a longer tube so it goes in more upright, and if they can, getting a loop in it or a lot of space in it and a loop in that one. It's also good because it gives you a bit of extra tube to cut off an end if you get a damaged end, or if you have to move a boiler about, you've got some slack in the tube, you can disconnect them. So maybe you've got to replace a component and the thing isn't in exactly the right place. You've got just that more give in the tube with the loop in it. But yeah, very nice boiler, all looking really good. I'm going to turn this around, but what you've got is the top of the heat exchanger there. It's a heat exchanger machine. The boiler's full of water, and then this is a copper tube with an injector at the bottom in the boiler, and as the water comes through that, the jacket of water outside flash heats this water. And this is the top tube, and there's a bottom one because this E61 group has a thermosiphon in it. Water flows out the bottom tube as it cools back into the boiler heat exchanger unit, which is this tube within a boiler, and then the hot water flows in here, and so it continues. This siphon is formed where water continually flows through this group just by thermal conductivity and the fact that it's cooling and flowing back. So there's a continuous circulation. This means the group radiates, well, I don't know, about 70 watts, but it keeps the group nice and hot. This at the top here, what we'd call, they call it an expansion valve, or you'll hear it called an overpressure valve. Now what that's there for, that's partly safety, because again, if something happens within the heat exchanger circuit, cold water goes in and it gets heated. If you didn't release that pressure, tremendous pressure would build up. That cold water would expand as a function of heat, and you'd get a tremendous pressure built up in the heat exchanger. You were talking 40, 50, 60 bar, you know, 1,000 psi, no problem. And what this does, these are normally in other types of machines, rotary pump machines, set to about 12 bar, and they let the water out. In machines like this with a vibration pump, they're also used to control the vibration pump pressure. So the manufacturers will often set them at 10 or 12 bar, or preferably it should be set to 9 bar. So it still fulfills its function of allowing water, expanded water back in the tank, so it doesn't split your heat exchanger, but it also controls brew pressure. And on these, there are different ways of working. You'd normally either remove this completely, and there'd be a screw in there to adjust it, or screwing this out a little bit might adjust the pressure. You won't know which type it is until you remove that or try and adjust the pressure. Now we'll turn it round. See, I'll just adjust the camera. All right. So here are the solenoids. They're solenoid valves. These are your autofill solenoids, and they control the flow of water to the main boiler for the hot water, and or whether it's going to the group. Okay, this machine's got a couple of solenoids, which for a heat exchanger machine is slightly unusual. They've probably got two solenoids for a reason, which isn't immediately apparent, but these coils here are the microcapillaries that lead to the gauge, which shows steam pressure and brew pressure on a single gauge with two dials. In here you've got your neon. I'm not sure if they're neons or LEDs. My eyes are not good enough to see. But they tell you when the machine's on or off. And underneath the water tank here is your vibration pump, which would probably be a standard Ulca. Now all these tubes you see going back into the tank, this is basically runoff from the expansion valve, the drips that come from that, and they'll go back to the tank. The reason for that is you don't want them filling up your drip tray, so they're sending that back to the water tank. There'll also be another one here, which could be deaeration from the pump coming back to the tank. Let's get this tank out of the way. It's got a little filter thing on the end. There is a water softener that comes with it. I don't really like these. I prefer to use the right water and not have a softener in the tank. I'm pretty certain that isn't telling the machine whether it's low water or not, because normally they would be on the bottom and quite heavily sprung, and when the tank lightens it would detect low water. What I do think is this is a sensor, and in the tank you can hear a float. Can you hear it? It's in the bottom there, and the float is in a tube here inside the tank. Now as the water fills up, that magnet floats up to the top, and as the water's used, when that magnet floats down to the bottom and hits that sensor, or gets near it, the plastic here, then that Hall effect sensor is activated and the machine will actually switch off. And the reason for the micro switch here then becomes clear, because if you took the tank away, the machine would actually think it was full of water. Now, how other companies deal with that in a different way. They don't have this sort of micro switch. What they do is, if the machine doesn't detect the magnet or the float, then it won't turn on, and when it drops away it then says it's low on water. But it's quite a nice system. So only when you put the tank in does that start detecting whether there's water or not. If you take the tank out, it's just going to think there's still no water in the machine. Quite neat. We get to the bottom of the machine here, and you can just see it if I tip it over a little bit. There's your pump. Now it looks like a standard Ulca EL5, not an EX5, because it's got plastic ends, not brass ends. But other than that, yeah, just looks a standard pump. You could replace it with an EX5, 50 watt or 45 watt EX5, make no difference at all. I specifically like this bit for the mains lead. I don't like machines with the mains leads purposely attached. I like them with mains leads. They're like a computer lead, or a kettle lead you can put on, and it does mean then if you've got a different country's lead like here, it's just the lead and not the entire machine hardwired. Plus if you pull the machine too hard, that lead just pops off this connector, doesn't damage anything. So I really quite like that, always have, and I wish more manufacturers would do it. Access to the boilers, I did check, there is a lower panel, and that gives you access to the boiler and no doubt access to the heating element, which I'll just double check. Yeah, heating element's just a standard replaceable heating element. It's not welded in. Sometimes you get welded in heating elements and you can't change it, you have to change the entire boiler, but this one is just a standard one that you'd use a largest box wrench on, take the bottom panel off and remove it. So yeah, very, very nice. Little pads there to stop vibration on the tank. There's little pads in the drip tray area to stop vibration. Now this flexing on a machine, quite normal, because remember with the case removed, I've removed all the strength from the machine. There's a guide car box down there. Now usually on the top of brew boilers you'll find a safety valve. Yeah, this boiler doesn't have a safety valve on the top of the boiler. They've actually shifted the safety valve to this, that would be this component here, and you can see it's connected through via the high pressure line, which would normally fill the boiler when the pump runs, but obviously in an overpressure situation in the boiler, could be 2 bar or whatever, a third layer of protection, apart from a couple of limit stats, is the safety valve here. This will go, and the safety valve water will jet back to the tank, which again I prefer. Some machines put it out to the drip tray, so that's what that component will be. This is probably just for radio interference, it's just a capacitor. It pretty much is a standard, I can't see the model. It's probably, can't see if it's an RL30. May control the temperature. I'd have to photograph that and then turn the picture up the right way to see the model. But yeah, all nicely wired, nice and neat, fully 61 group. Heater lights there, power light there. Valves, I don't know if they're compression valves or not. I think they might be non-compression valves. Again, when I power the machine on, I'll know whether they're that or just have to be closed gently. Either way, doesn't matter. I like both types equally. Well, because I'm not ham-fisted. If I was ham-fisted, I'd prefer non-compression valves. Nice twin gauge there. Yeah, I mean, all in all, these are a bit bug-eyed. But for the price, which I think is going to be sort of $8.99, very, very good. I remember looking at the VVs when that. Yeah, boiler's about 1.5, 1.4 litres. Very nice machine. Very, very nice looking. The side panel, this front is sort of shiny chrome, and the side panel, past about this 1 inch or 1.5 inches curve here, is satinised. And I thought, oh, when I was told it didn't have a chrome finish, I thought it won't look very nice, but it actually looks really good as a satinised finish. So yeah, very nice E61 group, not a cheap one, because you know you can recognise the various groups, but a full proper E61, very nice indeed. I'll stop the video now and start to use it to make a little bit of coffee.